Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome back. It's always great to be with you guys and have you here as we continue through our lecture series this semester. Welcome back to our newest installment of World Religions. So, today is another significant date in our semester as we begin another new course unit. I'll start today just by kind of talking about where we've been and what we are now going to start with today. We've learned about 5 different major world religious traditions in pretty good detail and depth so far. As you guys all know by now, these are Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and most recently, Buddhism. So now we're going to continue by examining a new topic, which are the religious traditions of China. So this is our new subject matter, Chinese traditions. So it's all about Chinese religious thought and the history of Chinese religious thought for the next 3 meetings. So we have, as usual, a 3 lecture series on this topic. The basic plan for our lesson today is we'll start with a general introduction to the Chinese traditions. So here's our little lesson plan. First, intro to the Chinese traditions, then origins and historical development, and then aspects of the divine. So, aspects. So 3, focal points as we embark on this journey into the understanding of Chinese religious thought and tradition. So let me just jump right into it and start telling you about these introductory remarks, just a general overview of this new interesting topic. So China does not only follow one religious tradition. Instead, there are 3 main traditions which are all important to Chinese religious beliefs and practice. And because of their importance, and to emphasize that none is the single dominant one among the 3, they're sometimes called the 3 teachings. Okay, so there's 3 major schools of thought and systems of religious ideas in the Chinese culture and history, and they're known as the 3 teachings. What are these 3 teachings? So these 3, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism in its particular Chinese variation of it, so the Chinese interpretation of Buddhism. Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, the 3 teachings. Each one offers something unique and distinctive, and they have their own different points of emphasis. But in China, many people follow all 3 and mix it together and combine elements of them in a distinctively Chinese way. So, unlike we see in a lot of other global cultures where one religion is maybe the dominant religion in the culture, there's kind of an embrace of plurality and pluralism in religion within Chinese society. It's believed that we can just take on all the best elements of these different traditions and merge them into one kind of cohesive whole. Aside from these 3 teachings, there's also the stories, legends, doctrines, and beliefs of the Chinese popular religion. So this is kind of almost like a 4th wheel that we'll also talk about. Chinese popular religion. And the Chinese popular religion is rooted in Chinese culture and history as well. It kind of helps to somewhat unify all the other 3 teachings into one systematic whole. And, we'll get into all the details of what they all are. The Chinese popular religion reflects in its own way a distinctively Chinese set of beliefs, values, and history. Now, these different schools of thought have shaped Chinese culture and history for thousands and thousands of years. And they all have an important role today, and they remain influential all the way up to the current day. The People's Republic of China sometimes discourages, in the modern context, exuberant or public displays of religiosity, since Some argue that it can be seen from the government's perspective as diminishing the power of the state, or somehow being contrary to establishing unity and good order. But despite the efforts to repress or to curtail religious expression, the practices persist and even thrive all the way up till the modern day today. So the various Chinese traditions do share a core belief in two basic concepts. So here are two basic fundamental ideas that sort of animate Chinese religious thinking. Okay, so one of them is that the cosmos is sacred. Now, cosmos, that's just a word that refers to the entire physical universe. The cosmos is just everything, all of the planets, stars, galaxies, the entire, system of space and time. So this view is that the universe, the whole system that we're a small part of, is a sacred place, and we should revere and respect and pay homage to the cosmos. We should revere it and respect it. It's sacred. And the second major concept that's kind of a unifying theme within all these different traditions is that all aspects of the cosmos are interrelated. Okay, so that means that there's connection and relationship between all the different things inside the cosmos. It's not that there are some things that have no connection whatsoever to other things going on in the universe. No, instead, they're all somehow linked. Everything exerts influence on all other things. So put those two things together. We live in a sacred cosmos where all aspects of it are interconnected with one another. And in their different ways, all the Chinese traditions try to uphold the sacredness of the cosmos by emphasizing that we should be in harmony. So the idea of harmony among ourselves and the cosmos and among all members of society is another one of the big kind of themes that unifies a lot of these ideas. So we should strive to achieve harmony. That's the word both and what it ought to say. So I'm just going to kind of put a little correction below it, the star. We should strive to achieve harmony both with the whole cosmos and in society, as members of society between each other. So harmony is an important idea. That could be harmony between people or between people and nature. Even Buddhism, as we know, which as we know originated in India, was adapted in Chinese culture to place more emphasis on this specific concept of harmony and cohesion in society and between man and nature. Now, some of these other major world religious traditions, we studied, of course, the Abrahamic religions, and Islam and Christianity, they have had some converts in China, and there is a significant Chinese Christian and Muslim community. But Buddhism has had by far the most success of the non-indigenous religious traditions in making headway in Chinese culture. Part of the reason for this is because Christianity and Islam are exclusive, meaning that you can't be both. As much as they have a common history and maybe they can be rooted back to some of the earlier aspects of the Abrahamic covenant, obviously a person who's a Christian believes that Jesus Christ is the Savior and the Messiah and the Son of God, and they don't believe that Muhammad is a prophet and so forth. So Christians don't agree with claims made by Muslims and vice versa. Muslims don't believe that Jesus Christ is God incarnate or that that he was the be-all, end-all in terms of prophets, because after all, they think Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. So there are these mutually exclusive and inconsistent aspects of Islam and Christianity, so a person has to choose between them, really. And in Chinese thought, there's a lot bigger preference for synthesizing things into one cohesive whole that does not conflict. So as much as there are, Christian and Islamic communities in China, they don't seem to have had the same a degree of success in winning a lot of adherents because of the Chinese cultural preference for harmony, which, of course, religions that are in conflict or at odds with one another in terms of some of their basic claims, they can't promote that idea of, total inclusivity among different teachings. And that's why the so-called three teachings, as they're sometimes called, are seen by most Chinese as complementary. They're mutually reinforcing instead of mutually exclusive. So they're not in conflict, even though, of course, they do have their own distinctive histories and approaches. And of course, there are some people who consider themselves especially focused on one of the traditions as opposed to another. They overlap in Chinese perspective on it, and they don't necessarily cancel each other out or force you to commit to only one and reject others. As such, there's a saying in China that the three teachings merge into one, and that's just a reflection of this idea that it's desirable for there to be some commonalities and unity between the different views, so that society can move together as one. Underlying the commonalities that are seen in the teachings is the Chinese traditional view of how the universe works. So according to ancient Chinese views, which were applied to all these different teachings and which remain in force today, everything that exists is made from the same life-giving and life-sustaining substance. So all things, here's a doctrine of Chinese thought. Okay, so there's this idea of a kind of substance monism, as you might call it. What that means is that there's only one substance that pervades all of reality, and every single thing is formed out of it. This kind of underlying substance that builds everything from people to gods, heaven, earth, it's all made from the same life-giving substance called qi. Now, the spelling that sometimes you find is qi, and that's the one that's used in our text. But the pronunciation sounds like chi, and you also sometimes see that as a transliteration of it. So I'll probably defer to the more readable version of it for many of the English-speaking members of the class. But anyway, qi, whether spelled with Q or with C, that is this sort of substance that is the base for all things that exist in the universe. Qi is described, in turn, as expressing itself through two complementary forces called yin and yang. So a lot of you have probably heard of yin and yang. You might have seen the kind of iconic symbol of a circle where the two complementary portions form the whole circle, and one is a lighter shade and one is a darker shade. But that's an important concept derived from Chinese thought, going back way into the ancient times. In its literal meaning, yin originally meant the shady side of the hill, while yang meant the sunny side of the hill. But its actual religious meaning is much more abstract. Yin is, broadly speaking, thought as feminine energy, which is dark and cold. So yin that's yin, and then yang is energy that is masculine, bright and warm. So they're complementary. They work together to form, through qi, all the things which exist. So all things are made from qi, which in turn is a mixture of yin and yang in varying proportions. So according to this Chinese ancestral thought, we've got one substance, qi, which itself is expressed by means of yin and yang. And all things in the universe are formed by cycles of transformation which involve these vital substances. Now, since everything is interrelated in this viewpoint and made of only one kind of substance with two forms, yin and yang, the different teachings, the three teachings, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, they all express an idea of attaining balance and proportion among things to advance cosmic harmony. So let's say some things about Confucianism first. Confucianism is based on the teachings of a 6th century BCE wise man whose name was actually Master Kong Fuzi. And his name has been Latinized for Westerners like us to be the name Confucius. So Confucius is just a sort of Westernized version of the original Chinese name Kong Fuzi, and so we say Confucius rather. His teachings basically focus on these things. They focus on relationships between people and how to create a harmonious society and a harmonious social order based on living according to certain moral principles. The main moral principle that is emphasized in Confucian thought is called Ren. And Ren roughly means humaneness or benevolence. So So, in Confucian thought, if you would like to promote harmony socially and in your own life, then you should seek to instill the value of Ren within yourself. This Ren means that you treat people and things in a humane way, and that you're also benevolent. So you're mindful of the impact of your actions on others, and you seek to bestow benefits on other people through your behavior and through your actions. So that's Ren. Confucius also places great emphasis on the value of filial piety. So that's a very important concept. And filial piety is definitely one of the center stage ideas in all of Chinese social, moral, and religious thought. It's the idea of having supreme honor toward family relationships and bonds, most especially that between parent and child. So filial piety, respect for and honor of the family relationships that you have, especially that of parent to child, utter respect and proper treatment of one's parents, siblings, and understanding the social role of each member of the family's position. There's the Chinese word for filial piety is jiao. So So you see the term that would be used to refer to it in Chinese. By maintaining jiao, Confucius teaches us that the family, the community, and then by extension, the entire cosmos can come into proper harmony and balance. So you really have to emphasize and focus on the way that you interact with and relate to your family members, have good, healthy, and respectful, deferential relationships to your parents and your elders. And that is supposed to somehow establish unity, harmony, peace among you, your family members, your society, and then even nature and the universe itself. So a few things about our introductory comments on Taoism next. Taoism is pronounced with like a D sound, but sometimes you'll find it spelled with the letter T. So Taoism is the same as whether spelled with a D or T, but it's pronounced with a hard B sound. Even when it's spelled with the letter T, you still refer to it as Taoism. So Taoism dates back also to the 6th century BCE, but it is based more on texts and scriptures that were written in the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE. It's not as concerned with interpersonal harmony as Confucianism is. but rather harmony between human beings and nature. So it's really mostly focused not on the social issues of maintaining order in society and among people, but rather the individual's quest to gain a sense of harmony with nature and themselves. Tao, in what does it literally mean? Tao means way or the way. So the Tao is the way, and this way or Tao is the way of the natural flow of things in the universe and in the cosmos. It refers to the natural way that things are and how they change and transform in the universe and world. The way that chi is endlessly created and destroyed and reconfigured again into the ever shifting landscape of reality. This is the way of the cosmos, the way of reality. Take, for example, the way that plants grow from, sunlight and soil and the resources provided by the water and the environment, and then turn into these plants that give seeds that then become new plants, or the way that stars form in the void of space, coalescing into, these hot bodies of gas that then can supply light and energy to planets, or the way that waves coalesce, crest, and then break on the shore just for another wave to come behind it. So there's this perpetual process of change and transformation, things being destroyed, recreated, matter taking different forms. A human body or an animal, whatever, lives and dies. Their body goes back to the earth, helps to, change into a different substance, and on in this ever shifting landscape of reality. So the main principle of Taoist belief is to harness and fuse with, but not interfere with, this process of change and transformation that's called the way or the Tao. You're supposed to harness it, appreciate it and value it, but not interfere with it. You're supposed to be in the flow of the Tao rather than somehow serving as an obstacle to it. The Chinese word for this non-interference with the Tao is Wu Wei. So this is like an important principle and concept of Taoism. So if anything is like the primary principle that you're supposed to live according to under Taoism, it's to recognize the Tao and do all that you can to support it and to facilitate it, but not to interfere with it or block it in some way or frustrate its momentum or movement. To achieve harmony in your life and with the cosmos, you have to be able to perceive the Tao in nature and then to act in accordance with it, or at least refrain from acting in a way that interferes with it. And many Taoists will try to also physically train their bodies to make them stronger and therefore better able to stay attuned to the Tao. Some Taoists try furthermore to pursue maximum longevity by doing this. So there's like a quest for long life that's also rooted deeply in Taoist practice. Some call this or think of it as a spiritual and a physical quest for maximum longevity, even immortality in the religious way of putting it. Now, Buddhism in China. We talked a little bit about this in our earlier lessons on Buddhism. Now, some of this will be a little bit of review, but we'll also add some additional context. Buddhism arrived in China in the 1st century ACE, the same basic time period that early Christianity was beginning to grow and spread throughout the world. And Buddhism did attract many followers in China. It was considered fascinating to Chinese culture because it was a foreign religion coming from India, and it had some exotic but also alluring elements like the Indian cosmology of all these different deities, the promise of liberation for the enlightened. This was a novel idea, the idea of individual salvation, or I should call it enlightenment, and the pursuit of it that could spare you from the pains and sufferings of life. That was a new idea that had not yet been found in the purely Chinese schools of religious thought. So many people found that interesting, attractive, and glommed right onto it. To some extent, Chan Buddhism, which is the Chinese equivalent of Zen Buddhism, to some degree, that Chan Buddhism is kind of a fusion between traditional Buddhism and Taoism. It shares with Taoism a rejection of language and logic as the vehicle for religious insight, and it rather places priority on a kind of experienced and immediately felt sense of the sacred knowledge of enlightenment or of the way. Chinese religions are more practical also in their concerns. They're And of course, the Chinese popular religion is also more practical in its concerns. They're more focused on things like attaining good health, long life, wealth, a happy home, children, safety from natural disasters, not as focused on esoteric questions like how was the world created or where does the soul go in the afterlife. The popular religion, the Chinese popular religion, to speak on that now for a moment, it also places great emphasis on the veneration of one's ancestors. So veneration means respect and recognition and honor given toward a being. So veneration of ancestors is a deeply held value in Chinese culture and also the Chinese popular religion. Yeah, so the veneration of ancestors. It's believed that if you honor your ancestors, then the ghosts of them will grant you blessings. So in a way, there's like a divine presence or spiritual task for the ancestor ghosts to play. But also, they say that if you don't pay your proper respects to these ancestors, then they can become angry and even do harm instead of granting blessings. So it's really like a requirement of your religious perspective or practice to show that honor and respect to them. So that gives us a nice, I think, general introduction to the Chinese traditions. Now with that overview in place, we're moving on to our second little unit of today's meeting anyway, which is to discuss the origins and the historical development of the Chinese traditions. So first off, the history of China. China is one of the oldest countries and cultures on the planet. It has existed for more than 5,000 years, and they had very long periods of dynastic rule throughout their history, the so-called dynasties that reigned for centuries in some cases. The core beliefs and ideas of Chinese religion have existed as far back as the time period of the Shang and Zhao dynasties. So here are two, historical time periods specified by the ruling order that prevailed at the time. So the Shang dynasty was from the 18th century BCE. That's 1800 years before the Common Era until the 11th century BCE. Okay, so that's the Shang dynasty, and it's followed then afterwards by the Zhao dynasty, which existed from the 11th century until the 3rd century BCE. So some important cultural and religious developments occur in that long span between the 18th and 3rd century BCE that encompasses both the Shang and Zhao dynasties. What do I have here? The core ideas that spawned during that ancient time period in Chinese history have had a significant influence on the development of Confucianism, Taoism, Chinese Buddhism, and the popular religion. One major aspect of Chinese cultural beliefs, as mentioned, is the reverence of ancestors, and that became a very prominent feature of the culture during the Shang era, which again is from the 18th to the 11th century BCE. Dead were buried with elaborate rituals, and offerings to the deceased were made. During the Shang dynasty, sometimes people would even ask yes or no questions to their deceased ancestors using what were called oracle bones. So interesting little fact about practices and customs back then. Oracle bones were used for divination. So an oracle bone, what they would do is they would take like the bone of, say, an ox or a sheep, and then they would apply a heated rod to it, which would cause the bone to crack. And then they would go, and a diviner, who's someone that is supposed to be trained or specialized in this knowledge, would look at the pattern of cracks that had been caused by the rod, and then this was supposed to give information or answers to your yes or no questions. So you pose a yes or no question, like, will I have children? Will my business succeed? And the ancestor ghost presumably is listening to this question. The rod is applied to this bone, and the pattern of cracks that are given are supposed to reveal the answer, whether it was yes or no, from the spirit in the afterlife to the diviner, and thus to the people posing these questions. So they also had a belief during that time in what's called the high god Shangdi, or Shangdi. So this was one idea of kind of like a godhead sitting at the apex of the afterlife and the spiritual realm. He was referred to during this time, but during the Zhao dynasty, which again spans from the 11th to the 3rd century BCE, he was replaced by the concept of Tian, which means heaven. So the idea of a kind of anthropomorphized high god figure was replaced with the idea of just heaven itself, known as Tian, in the Zhao dynasty. The reason that this replacement happened was because the high god, based on the doctrines that existed, was thought to be too high up and therefore too distant to be in a close relationship with humanity. So Tian was supposed to be something that had a little bit more proximity to the human realm, and therefore a more fitting object of reverence and worship and prayer and so on. During the Zhao dynasty, Tian became the focus of acts of worship and prayer. And Tian was thought to preside over the souls of the dead and also to bestow what's called the mandate of heaven. Okay, so what's this mandate of heaven that Tian could bestow on the world or on the Chinese community? Well, sorry. The mandate of heaven is supposed to give legitimacy to the current dynasty or emperor to rule and to have legitimate authority over the people. So from the heavenly realm, if this emperor or dynastic rule was legitimate, then that would be authorized by Tian. Now, if Tian was unhappy, though, with a given ruler, the belief they had was that that would be shown by disorder that would affect China, whether that would be rebellion, famine, natural disasters, floods, tsunamis, what have you. And they thought that if conditions became bad enough in China, what that would represent or reflect was that Tian had withdrawn the mandate of heaven. And then that means that this creates justification to overthrow the ruling order. So they believed that the rulers of China, dynastic rulers or emperors, only serve in their role through the mandate provided by heaven. And if there was disorder in society or these rulers were not doing their jobs well, then the mandate could be withdrawn. The people would see that through bad things happening in China, and then that would create, a basis or a justification for this ruler to be deposed and overthrown. Now, other basic elements of religious thought were also introduced during the Zhao dynasty, including the aforementioned idea of qi and yin-yang. By the 6th century BCE, the authority of the Zhao dynasty was on the decline, and this led to a period of disorder in which new theories were being formed about how best to restore social harmony and cohesion. The many teachings that proliferated during this period of instability are collectively called the 100 Schools. And out of the 100 Schools emerged two of the big teachings that we've talked about, Confucianism and Taoism. So a little more about Confucianism. Again, it's named after Kong Fuzi, whose name was Latinized in the West as Confucius. He was born in 551 BCE and he died in 479 BCE. So just getting his dates here. So yeah, Confucius lived for that span of time. And he was born in Shandong province, which is a region in the east of China. He came from a poor but well-respected family in his community. And part of his bio is that he served for a while as a government officer in the Chinese imperial bureaucracy. After that, he spent 13 years traveling across China, asking leaders to try and implement his ideas about government and social organization. But he came back disappointed, having not made as many, not advanced his ideas far enough in his view. So he came back home after his 13-year sojourn, a little disappointed, but spent the rest of his life teaching his students and editing his writings until eventually, as you see, he passed in 479 BCE. Now, Confucius claimed that government should be founded on morality, and that every person in society has to focus on their social role in order to promote and ensure harmony in the society. One man that followed his ideas a couple generations later, who also became well known, was Mencius. So here's another key figure from that early Confucian era, or at least the era that followed it. Mencius lived from 371 to 289 BCE. And I'll just tell you a little bit about some of his ideas. He expanded on Confucius's teachings. He was a Confucian himself, but he kind of took it in a new direction. He expanded on the teachings about good government and individual virtue. He added the idea that human nature is essentially good. So that's the main contribution of Mencius, that human nature is at a fundamental level good and righteous. So in his view, people have the right to rebel against unjust rule, since we're essentially good at a human level, universally. We should live with a good government, and if it's not doing its job to promote harmony and virtue in society, then it's legitimate to depose. There's a third great Confucian thinker from ancient times. That's name is Junji. So here's another important figure that was also a Confucian a little later in history. That's from 298 until 238 BCE. Junji had a very different view of human nature than Mencius, though. Even though he was a Confucian, he had a much different view, maybe a less optimistic view, perhaps a more cynical view of human nature. But his view is that humans are essentially evil, that we actually are not good at heart, and therefore we have to be forced to be made good through strict laws and even strict punishments. So he emphasized and advocated for a very kind of strict social order with draconian and harsh laws that would keep people in line, because he just didn't trust that human nature was fundamentally benevolent or benign. And I find that that's a topic or a question that continues to beguile a lot of people. Are human beings fundamentally good and society is what ends up corrupting us? Or are we fundamentally bad and society is the only thing that keeps us in order from just doing all kinds of terrible things? So you see that interesting difference between the ideas of Mencius and Junji there. So the views of Junji were actually influential, though, and taken to radical extremes by another member of the Hundred Schools known as legalism. Now, this is not a religious thought process, the legalist school of thought, but they were influential in the reign of the first emperor of China, whose name was Qin Shi Huangdi. So here is another important figure, not a religious figure, a political figure, but I need to mention him. Yeah, and he lived from 220, or not lived from, but he reigned for a short time. His reign spanned from 221 to 209 BCE. So that's the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi. And he and his regime kind of used the legalist thought to justify a brutal reign that was quite oppressive. And during his rule, there were mass book burnings. A lot of scholars were executed, people who he thought might be a challenge to the prevailing order. But he had a very short rule, and that gave way to the next big dynasty, which was the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty endured from 206 BCE to 220 ACE. So here are those dates. So here we have another period of dynastic rule that goes from 200 years before the Common Era to about 200 years after the Common Era, about a 400 and something year span. During the Han Dynasty, the Chinese imperial bureaucracy was developed, and that imperial bureaucracy remained stable and ran the country all the way up until the 20th century when you get to the communist revolution in China. But in this system, government officers were trained in Confucian values and beliefs, and that elevated the vital role of Confucianism in both religious but also political life of the state. In the centuries after the Han Dynasty, Taoism and Buddhism begin to gain an even greater following and an influence than Confucianism did. Eventually, we get to the Song Dynasty, which begins in the 10th century ACE, and it continues until the 13th century ACE. So now it's the Song Dynasty. That's from 10th to 13th century ACE. Obviously, like a 300-year span there. And in the Song Dynasty, there was a revival of Confucian thought, and that time period under the Song Dynasty is sometimes called the Neo-Confucian era or age. The best-known scholar of that time period was Zhu Ji, and that scholar lived from 1130 to 1200 ACE. He proposed a philosophy based on Confucian moral principles, and he argued that all things have an ordering principle within them, which is called Li, which shapes the way our qi takes form. So he argued that Li. Human beings, he say, have to analyze all things to understand their basic ordering principles. The ordering principle is kind of like the deep blueprint of what the thing's all about, what its potentials are, what its essence is. He said that we can discover the essence of things, the Li of things, and then to train ourselves to base our actions on those ordering principles, most importantly on the ordering principles of human behavior. Neo-Confucians, as we've said in the Song Dynasty era, they also advocated the practice of quiet sitting, a meditative pursuit to cultivate self-understanding, which derives somewhat from Buddhist influence as well. Now, Lao Tzu is the great founder of Taoism, and his name is sometimes spelled in different ways, Lao Tzu, or sometimes, as our textbook puts his name, Lao Tzu, but it's pronounced Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is the founder of Taoism. Not a whole lot is known about his life, but we do know some important facts. For example, according to the tradition, he was born in 604 BCE. So, yeah. So that's again, 600 years before the Common Era, right around the turn of the 6th century BCE. According to some of the accounts of his life, his birth and his process of the pregnancy of his mother was miraculous. We'll come back to that later, discussing the legendary elements of his biography then. But anyway, he served for a time period in the imperial bureaucracy of China, and he argued for a government that granted people more freedom. But he became disillusioned with the failure to advance this message very far. So he ended up ending that career as a bureaucrat, and he retreated to the mountains. On his way to the mountains, he was stopped by a guard at one of the western transit points. And this guard had heard of Lao Tzu, knows that he's wise, and he pleads with him, please, can you just write down your ideas and teachings so that there will be a record of them for us? So he complied with that, and that is the origins of the sacred text of Taoism, which is called the Tao Te Ching. So So the Tao Te Ching is the sacred text of Taoism, written by Lao Tzu. There are two main forms of Taoism. There's philosophical and religious. So philosophical Taoism and religious Taoism. Philosophical Taoism is what Lao Tzu himself stood for, and it mostly focuses on perceiving the forces and patterns of nature, the flow of nature, which is the Tao, and then trying to follow it and not interfere with it, as we said before. Another well-known follower of philosophical Taoism is Zhuangzi, who lived in the 4th century BCE. So here's just a follower of the Taoist school of thought. So Zhuangzi lived in the 4th century BCE, and he said that peace and harmony are the natural order of things until human beings interfere with it. So if we would just leave things alone, nature is already perfect and operating according to the best principles possible. It's only our interference with it, our messing with it, that causes all the problems. Now, religious Taoism takes form a little later in the 2nd century ACE. Religious Taoism combines ancient Chinese practices with Taoist scriptures, and they focus on the pursuit of long life. They have more rituals, and they do have the belief in deities and divine figures, which is not emphasized in just straight philosophical Taoism, but the religious Taoism does have the idea of ritual, religious and sacred ritual, and divine beings. The religious Taoists eventually develop a whole clergy of priests who help to teach doctrines and oversee rituals, just like you see in certain other world religions that we've studied. Okay, now Buddhism, as we've learned, enters China from India in the 1st century around the time of Christianity's origins. Its biggest period of growth in China is between the 3rd and the 9th centuries ACE. And it was attractive to many because it offered a structured view of the afterlife, and it also held out hope for people to be saved from the difficulties of the human condition. In times of political instability, and there were definitely some time periods like that in Chinese history, this message held particular appeal, that even if the world is sometimes unstable and difficult, there's a better afterlife waiting for you, or at least maybe the possibility of achieving enlightenment. Buddhism in China adapted to Chinese culture and beliefs. So there's a couple of different forms of Chinese Buddhism. One is Tiantai Buddhism. Okay. Tiantai Buddhism organized Buddhist teachings as relative truths. They emphasize that there's no objective truth and there's just relativity in what's true and false. That version of Buddhism held a lot of appeal to Chinese because of the Chinese cultural preference for avoiding interpersonal conflict and promoting harmony. So if there's no objective truth, then that means we also don't have to fight amongst each other, and we can all be content to have relative truths and points of view all taken as somewhat on the same footing and having equality. Pure Land Buddhism, we talked about that earlier. It's the belief that the Bodhisattva Amitabha, Buddha of light, presides over a pure land that a person can go to in the afterlife if they sincerely devote themselves to him and live a moral life. So Pure Land Buddhism, with its promise of a happy rebirth in the Pure Land, was popular in these sometimes uncertain times. And it also offered a role for devotionalism, meaning like devotion and worship of a divine figure, which is kind of like a novel concept to Chinese culture itself. Chan Buddhism, which is like the Zen form, is, well, it's the Chinese version of Zen. Zen is the Japanese term for it, but Chan Buddhism is the 3rd other major form of Buddhism within China. And it pairs well with Taoism in Chinese tradition because they have a shared goal of understanding the true nature of reality, and they also have a shared belief that there are inherent limits on language and rational discourse to reveal the essential aspects of reality and the sacred knowledge that we want to gain about it. Nonetheless, despite its success, Buddhism in China struggled sometimes and was subject to persecution at times because of its perception as being a foreign religion, that originated from India and not from China itself. In fact, during the Tang Dynasty, and in particular between the years of 841 and 845 ACE, there was a crackdown on Buddhism in China. So during the Tang Dynasty, I wrote it there, between 841 and 845 ACE, the Common Era, there was a crackdown on Buddhism in China under the rulers that prevailed at that time. So thousands of monasteries were destroyed or closed. So finally, about the Chinese popular religion, it was fully formed by 1000 ACE. It features many indigenous practices that are specific to Chinese culture and history. For example, shamanism. What that is a person who's called a shaman gets into some trance-like state. And when they're in that state, the belief is that they can leave their own body and travel to and communicate with the spirit world. And they can communicate with these spirits, pleading for things like rain or invoking deities, healing people, or exorcising demons. So shamanism was an aspect of the Chinese popular religion. They also have the divination that we talked about earlier, using oracle bones and things like that, and also the heavy emphasis on the veneration and respect of ancestors. The Chinese popular religion has also kind of integrated elements of the other three teachings into its body of beliefs. So it has borrowed elements from Buddhism of karma and rebirth, and embraced both celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as the Taoist deities spoken of in religious Taoism. So Chinese popular religion is interesting because it really just kind of absorbs all these diverse ideas into one body of thought. Pure Confucians reject the popular religion because they're not focused on the existence of deities, just social order and moral principles. Although the popular religion appropriates elements of Buddhism and Taoism, there are purely Buddhist and Taoist priests and practitioners that don't necessarily consider their religion to be just a part of the popular religion. So as much as the popular religion embraces all the others, they don't all necessarily see themselves as part of something bigger than themselves. Nonetheless, there is this emphasis on syncretism, meaning synthesis between all the different views, given the Chinese cultural preference for harmony and non-conflict. Now, in the last 200 years or so, Chinese religious traditions have been challenged by encounters with the West. Sometimes Westerners look at these traditions as unmodern. They maybe compare them unfavorably to Western science and, scientific rationalism. But, I would say that as much as that's a point of critique that some can make, we obviously have a lot of religiosity in our own culture, and some of those things could be accused of some of the same kind of problems. So I think that there's not necessarily any better or worse when it comes to that. The communist regime of China taking power over the past 200 years has also tried to curb the influence of traditional religious expression in China to avoid any threats to the ruling order. But despite this, the traditions remain and even thrive. So now that we've reviewed the origins and the historical development of the Chinese traditions, we just have one last component for today's meeting, and that is to discuss aspects of the divine within all these traditions to the Chinese religious landscape. So the Chinese idea of the divine emphasizes two major factors. One, deities and spiritual beings that are venerated and even prayed to and worshipped in shrines and temples. And the other are ordering principles. So one, divine beings like gods or ghosts and etc. In the case of the divine beings, you worship them, you petition to them. But the other major aspect are ordering principles. Ordering principles, that means forces that structure reality. And instead of worshiping the ordering principles, you're supposed to contemplate them, gain awareness of them, act in accordance with them, but not to worship, because they're not construed as personal. They're not like portrayed in the form of a being that has consciousness or something. It's just principles of reality. It would be like, the idea of gravity or something, to use a Western scientific analogy, but in a more deep-rooted way, it's just the underlying primal forces of reality that you're supposed to be able to understand, accept, and become aware of. So therefore, the Chinese religious perspective sometimes involves connection to divine beings through worship or offering to deities, but in other cases, it involves the pursuit of insights into the nature of reality to pursue enlightenment rather than worship. And that kind of shows you that they're really embracing all sides of the spectrum when it comes to religious thought, because, like in, say, some religious thought, your goal is to become enlightened. In other religious thought, it's to pray to a god that will bestow grace on you. And so they really think that both elements are important. The deities of the Chinese popular religion, and this is pretty interesting, they're described in the tradition as members of a celestial bureaucracy. So celestial bureaucracy. So the gods that are spoken of in Chinese popular religion are thought to reside in a bureaucracy in the spirit realm. And this celestial bureaucracy is supposed to be parallel to, or in some ways structurally similar to, the Chinese government's imperial bureaucracy. So the celestial bureaucracy is kind of like a model taken from the real human bureaucracy of the Chinese government. And what that shows is that there's very deep-rooted importance in Chinese thought of social structure and order, so much so that even in the realm of heaven and the divine, there's a governmental type bureaucracy where there's officers of different rank. In this pantheon of deities, you find Taoist deities, as well as Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as Chinese folk legends and heroes. So the Chinese celestial bureaucracy is populated with all the divine figures from all the various schools. An interesting, inclusive, one-size-fits-all approach, just embracing all the deities as a collective. Each deity, according to this idea, has its own function, and a worshiper can pray to whichever one answers to your particular needs. So some deities might be there to heal the sick. Others might be there to help a person have children or to become fertile. Some might protect soldiers in war, or maybe you just pray to one that brings good luck or wealth. The deities are also described as being ranked in the celestial hierarchy. So the celestial rank has authority over the earthly rank of the same order. So like the emperor of the celestial bureaucracy has authority over the emperor of the earthly imperial bureaucracy. And you also have authority over those that are lower in rank within your own bureaucracy, whether it's the celestial one or the actual imperial one. Deities, just like their earthly counterparts, can be promoted or demoted depending on their performance. So you have to worry about job performance even if you're one of the gods in the Chinese popular religion. If they don't carry out their duties well, they could be punished by their superiors and demoted to a lower rank. Just reading here a little bit from page 208 on that. Says here, high-ranking deities have authority over those in the earthly bureaucracy who are of equivalent rank to their own celestial juniors and vice versa. Depending on their performance, deities, like mortal civil servants, may be promoted or demoted. Those who don't carry their duties properly may be punished by their superiors in the celestial bureaucracy or by human officials that outrank them. For example, a god that fails to bring rain during the drought may be removed from a temple and left in the sun to see how he likes being hot and dry. Those who give exemplary service will be rewarded with promotion. So it really emphasizes and enforces this idea of bureaucratic order that's so deeply rooted in the cultural way of thinking that it's also an element of religious thought too. Who's the lowest ranking member in the celestial bureaucracy? That's an interesting thing to point out. That's known as the local god, which the Chinese term for it is Tudigong. Tudigong, local god, lowest ranking officer in the celestial bureaucracy. They describe the role of Tutigong as similar to a village policeman. Their job is to keep the peace, ward off troublesome ghosts, and monitor local events. So there's a local god for each village or community. A resident of the village can report things to them, such as a marriage, a birth, a death, etc. And the Tutigong then will pass this information on to their superiors when appropriate in the celestial bureaucracy. At the top of the celestial hierarchy, who's the highest ranking member? So we're going from the lowest to the highest. The highest ranking member is the high god called the Jade Emperor. So he's at the apex of power and authority in the celestial bureaucracy. He's the supreme judge and the ruler of heaven who authorizes all promotions and demotions in the bureaucracy. Legends say that he wears the robes and headdresses of the old Chinese emperors from the earthly imperial bureaucracy. There are not actually many temples devoted to the Jade Emperor in China, only because he's considered so remote and therefore only possible to communicate with through intermediaries. Unlike in other religions where you just talk to God directly as you pray, in this view, he's like a head of state. And if you wanted to talk to, say, the president, you'd really not be able to as an everyday citizen because you're so far distant in the social system from him. So you'd have to maybe talk to your local representative, who could then maybe try to assemble a coalition that mobilizes ideas for their constituents, eventually gets the attention of, say, the highest ranking member of the government. In the same way, the Jade Emperor is so powerful and on high that he's too distant from everyday people to be directly communicated with. Therefore, there's not a lot of temples to the Jade Emperor, because you can't really have a direct conversation with him. Humans who live excellent and virtuous lives can be even appointed to the celestial bureaucracy, according to these views. One example is Mazu, who's talked about on page 209. Let me just read about that. Mazu, or Tianhu, the Empress of Heaven. So I'm talking about this person, this woman named Mazu. So let me tell you her story. One of the most popular deities of southern China. Her story illustrates important aspects of the Chinese pantheon, the human origin of some of the gods, their particular function and appeal, and the way they're promoted for merit. According to legend, she was born with auspicious portents in the 11th century to a family of fishermen in Fujian province in South China. The child Mazu displayed supernatural powers. One day, knowing that her father and two brothers were in danger in a storm at sea, her soul left her body to rush to their aid and began to pull their two boats to shore. But her mother found the apparently lifeless body of Mazu and, terrified, shook her arm, causing the soul to release the father's boat. Her brothers returned home, weeping that their father had nearly been saved, but then was lost. They also reported seeing Mazu's shape on the waves. After she died at age 28, local boats began to carry an image of her for protection at sea. After 2 centuries of popular veneration, she was officially recognized as a goddess and promoted in the celestial hierarchy. In the 17th century, she became Empress of Heaven, a consort of the Jade Emperor. And you see here a ceremony at a temple of Mazu in northern Taiwan. I don't know if this is easy to be visible to you, but it's part of your textbook. And it just shows a procession of people all gathered in reverence and worship of this human turned divine figure. So that's just kind of interesting to see that a human being in this religious tradition can achieve a form of divinity as a reward, and then promotion through a bureaucracy afterwards because of the consistent veneration over generations of them. We also see that there's kind of a symbiotic relationship between these deities and human worshippers. Offerings are made to these gods by the worshippers, such as incense, food, and even money, and this requires the deity to respond. But Chinese deities, unlike some of the ones we've studied before, are not considered omnipotent. So there's a limit to what they can provide. That means they're not all powerful. They can only do so much. Requests also have to go through the proper channels. A regular person, as we've said, can't directly petition the Jade Emperor, but has to talk to someone lower on the totem pole in order to get their requests received. Some also believe in a trinity of Taoist beings known as the three pure ones. In religious Taoism, there's this doctrine of the three pure ones. They're supposed to represent the awesome and abstract power of the Tao, and they're described as formless and indescribable. They're not prayed to, but rather recognized as ultimate and essential forces by religious Taoists. Confucians, as we've said, they don't have a lot of metaphysical beliefs about, say, gods and spirits, but they do believe in the idea of heaven. Nonetheless, their idea of heaven is also more abstract. It's not necessarily a place where you go like a paradise above the clouds, but instead it refers to a moral order within the universe. For this reason, Confucius, who tried to spread his message of adherence to good conduct and social order, believed he was, quote unquote, doing the will of heaven. So, quote of his. Philosophical Taoists tell us to see how all things are temporary states of the vital qi that forms everything. But they don't believe in the worship of deities. They say instead to just be aware of and respect and accord with the Tao of reality. And some of the celestial bodhisattvas and Buddhas of Buddhism have also been enshrined in the celestial bureaucracy too. So that completes my opening lecture for you guys on the Chinese religious traditions. And I think we've learned a lot of good and interesting information on this, but we have much more to talk about. So there's going to be still 2 lectures to follow this on the same topic. But for now, I really hope that you guys have enjoyed it and that you're all doing good. Let me know if there's any way I can help at any time. You can reach out to me. But for now, I'm just going to close this stream and just have a great day, and I'll be in touch with you guys soon with the next installment. Okay? Thank you. Bye-bye.